Made an official diagnosis in the 1980s, the autism spectrum disorder has rapidly become one of the most discussed topics on both political and social justice landscapes. In recent years, especially, the standard perception for what life looks like on the spectrum has become a little bit skewed. What was once treated as a medical diagnosis is now overwhelmingly romanticized as a superpower or a series of personality quirks, making an already complex disability even harder for society to understand. So, today, we're going to break down exactly what it means to live life on a spectrum and explore the different levels 1, 2, and 3. Welcome to the Aletheia Project. The autism spectrum diagnosis has been around for 50 years and still causes confusion for a lot of people. This could be due to the vastness of the spectrum or just to the fact that it is not talked about as often as some might wish it would be. 8 years ago, I myself knew almost nothing about autism. I had grown up surrounded by disability, and I knew that I loved working with that population. But as a young teen, there was one diagnosis that truly intimidated me, and that was autism spectrum disorder. It was not until a friend of mine insisted that I go with her to volunteer at a summer camp for kids impacted by disability that I had the opportunity to be around somebody diagnosed with autism. I remember distinctly driving into this family retreat center and thinking to myself that I would be happy with any child of any age with any diagnosis, but I just couldn't or didn't want to try to handle a child with autism. Well, life has a sense of humor, and I got matched with a absolutely incredible little boy with autism spectrum disorder, and he completely changed the trajectory of my entire life. I quickly realized the beauty, hilarity, and absolute incredible personalities that come along with this diagnosis, and that it is undeniably and sadly very misunderstood. And so today I'm hoping to kind of break down those barriers for you a little bit, to walk you through exactly what autism is and why it's not a diagnosis that we ought to be intimidated by. Autism spectrum disorder was added to the DSM for the very first time around 50 years ago, and it was defined as persistent deficits in communication and social interaction. And we now know autism to be made up of three unique levels. And while some people prefer not to utilize these particular types of labels for the sake of simplifying things and also explaining them in a way that's a little bit easier to understand, we are going to utilize the terms level 1, level 2, and level 3. So let's start with level 1. Level 1 is going to be very high functioning autistic people. So think advocates like Temple Grandin, who are able to go on stage in front of people or have lengthy conversations talking about their diagnosis and the ways that they wish they could be perceived by the world. These individuals are typically able to function fairly independently, of course, with the right supports in place, but they are often able to hold a job, get an apartment, in some cases, even get married and have children. This particular level of autism used to be known as Asperger's, and this has kind of faded out over the years and is now just classified under that level 1 umbrella. Level 2 is going to be made up of individuals that require a little bit more extensive support. So they might be more typically verbal, they may be able to maintain a semblance of independence. However, typically these individuals are not able to live on their own and in some cases may struggle to hold a normal job. They require a lot more significant support. They tend to display a little bit more on the repetitive behavior side and just in general require a little bit heavier support than level 1. And then lastly, we have level 3, which has also been known as profound autism. So this is a relatively new term, just coined about a year or so ago, to describe level 3 autism. And the reason that it is considered profound is because these children and adults typically require 24/7 support. This means they cannot be left alone at any time. Many of them have minimal ability to use spoken language and require assistance from either caregivers or from their parents to do basic things like dressing, feeding themselves, being able to go to the bathroom, basic hygiene. These are also the children that we typically see struggle more on the behavior side of things. We may see more violent meltdowns or inability to regulate their nervous system in places out in public. Also, these kids typically have a more difficult time communicating. So, if they are nonverbal, they may utilize devices such as ACC devices or spellers. There is a very well known phrase that if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. You can have a room of 10 different children, all of whom have level 3 autism, and their unique personalities and behaviors and needs and traits are going to be different. It's not a one size fits all. And that, I think, sometimes can be why people struggle to understand the spectrum, but it becomes a lot easier and simpler if you just take it on a case by case basis. Rather than trying to understand the whole world of autism, how can you better understand the people in your life, in your schools, and your churches, the one child with autism that you may have the opportunity to interact with? Another thing that's important to know about autism spectrum disorder is that it is so much more than just a group of personality traits. It actually is a pretty significant medical condition, and we know that now just looking at brain scans. In recent years, scientists have been able to discover that the actual brain makeup of children and adults with autism looks different. There are actual physical differences in the makeup of the brain, from the frontal lobe to the basal ganglia to the brainstem. There are certain areas that are underdeveloped or overdeveloped, and this is often what causes speech impediments, learning delays, complex and fine motor issues, things like that related to this particular diagnosis. Furthermore, autism does fairly significantly impact fine motor skills. And this is what's going to cause those difficulties with communication. Speech is a fine motor skill, just like writing or typing or driving. And so children and adults with autism, their brains just have a hard time getting the language from up here in their head to here and being able to speak it. Now, this does not necessarily, hardly ever does it mean that there is not intelligence there. Most children with autism are highly intelligent, and just because they can't speak doesn't mean that they can't understand. It just means there's miscommunication happening between their brain and their mouth, and this is due to that fine motor issue that comes with autism. It can also cause issues in the development of tone. So you'll see children who have muscles that are either overdeveloped or underdeveloped. This is what contributes to toe walking or extreme sensory seeking, like children who really love to run and to spin, seeking that sensory input, or children who can't stand certain types of clothing on their bodies. This all has to do with the way that the brain interprets sensory input as well as the way that it is able to compensate for that lack of or too much tone. In addition to affecting physical development and brain development, autism often typically has significant comorbidities. And this can kind of seem like a strong word, but for scientific purposes, we are just going to use it for our episode today. And what comorbidities means is that there is an additional diagnosis occurring as a result of the original diagnosis. So when it comes to autism, it is not uncommon for children to also be diagnosed with things like epilepsy, ODD, ADHD, anxiety disorders, metabolic disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, as well as more complicated eating disorders such as ARFID, which is avoidant restricted food intake disorder, and PICA, which is where children and adults have the urge to eat non-food items. And you can imagine that this causes some fairly significant issues, both to their nutritional intake as well as to their development. It is pretty much impossible to deny, with all of this data in mind, that autism is a fairly significant medical diagnosis. And what used to affect 1 in 500 families now affects 1 in 31. And so far, that statistic is only growing. It is believed that in the next 10 to 15 years, if the stats continue increasing the way that they are increasing, we will eventually see 1 in 2 children diagnosed with autism. So that's 15 years from now. We will go from 1 in 31 to 1 in 2. And this is a fairly significant issue that, unfortunately, is really not due to better diagnostic protocol. And the reason that we understand this is simply by using a little bit of reverse math. Well, the common conception is that the increase in autism is due to better diagnostics. It just doesn't make sense when you keep level 2 and level 3 in mind. So think about it this way. 50 years ago, there was 1 in 300 children. And of that 1 in 300, roughly 30% had level 3 autism, according to modern day statistics. But we don't see that 30% represented from the 1980s group. People who are in their 50s and 60s, we don't really see a significant amount of them with level 3 autism, not like how we do today. And if diagnostic protocol was getting better, theoretically, that should only impact high-functioning autism, because these would be the adults and children slipping under the radar, that they weren't able to receive a diagnosis because they were written off as potentially having something like ADHD or maybe just a quirky personality. We should see an exponential growth in higher-functioning autism, while lower-functioning autism remains relatively the same, if it was true that this diagnostic increase was due to the diagnostic protocol getting better alone. Instead, that's not what we see at all. As a matter of fact, across the spectrum, we are seeing a higher increase in diagnostic, and level 3 autism is actually on the rise as well. And this is a fairly significant issue. Just think forward thinking, right? So these are children right now, but eventually they're going to be adults. They're going to have more significant support. Perhaps their primary caregiver is not going to be able to take care of them anymore. And so it's imperative for us to start thinking through, what does it mean when that 1 in 31 turns into 1 in 2? What does it mean for us as a society? What does it mean for these families and their support systems? And what can we implement now to hopefully make the future better, not just for us, but also for these children and their families? And this really is the key point that I wanted to focus on today. You have a crash course understanding in autism now. You've got a fairly decent knowledge of what each level means, but bringing it back to the realistic and the tangible, is that these families are out there, and more each day are receiving this diagnosis. ASD is not rare anymore, and if you don't already know someone on the spectrum, chances are you might in the near future. To understand what autism is and the complex needs that often accompany it allows us as a society to be more understanding, more supportive, and more inclusive of these incredible families and individuals living on the spectrum. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Aletheia Project. If you liked, loved, or hated what you heard, please feel free to comment down below, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you next time.